Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into a story that's, well, kind of wild.
Oh, I think wild is an understatement.
Okay, good point. Today we're going deep on the race to build the atomic bomb.
Specifically, the early days of the U.S. effort, the Manhattan Project, top secret stuff, high stakes.
We've got a podcast episode all about it, and yeah, this is a story that'll really get you thinking. So, where do we even begin with something like this?
Well, believe it or not, the U.S. Atomic Research Program didn't start with some general or politician.
It didn't.
Nope. It all started with a letter from Albert Einstein.
Einstein. Seriously. Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What was in this letter?
Picture this, October 1939. An economist, Alexander Sachs, walks right into the Oval Office and hands this letter from Einstein to President Roosevelt.
Wow, straight to the top.
Yeah. See, Einstein and a bunch of other scientists, they were super worried that Germany was working on an atomic bomb.
So this wasn't just some theoretical what-if kind of thing.
No, they really believed Germany was on the path to building this weapon. And that letter, it really shook things up. Roosevelt formed the Advisory Committee on Uranium right away.
The Advisory Committee on Uranium. That's kind of mouthful.
It is, but that was basically the start of the U.S. Atomic Research Program.
Okay, so they've got this committee, but wasn't the science behind all this atomic energy stuff still pretty new? What were some of the, I don't know, the big challenges they had to figure out first?
Well, figuring out how to even make atomic energy work practically was a huge one, and that's where Leo Szilard comes in.
Leo Szilard, was he on the committee?
He was a physicist, and he was, really concerned about what an atomic bomb could do, especially in the wrong hands, you know?
Wow.
He came up with this idea of a nuclear chain reaction.
A nuclear chain reaction. I'm no physicist, so break that down for me.
So basically, you split an atom, right? And that can trigger other atoms to split too, releasing a ton of energy, like a domino effect, but on an atomic level.
Whoa, that sounds pretty intense.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing it wasn't exactly easy to, just make that happen.
You're right about that. There were a lot of hurdles. Like first, they had to find and isolate a specific type of uranium called U-235.
U-235, huh?
Sounds important.
Oh, it was. Crucial for building a bomb. And not only that, they had to figure out how to trigger the chain reaction and how to control it so it didn't, go out of control.
So find the right uranium, start the reaction, keep it under control. Yeah, sounds like a lot.
It was a huge undertaking, tons of pressure.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, while the scientists were feeling this urgency, a real race against time,
Yeah.
the U.S. government, they didn't seem all that concerned at the beginning.
Seriously. The government was dragging their feet on something this important.
You wouldn't believe it.
Yeah.
There's a story about Mark Oliphant, an Australian physicist. He came to the U.S. in 1941, wanted to check on the American research program.
Well, he found out that Lyman Briggs, the head of the U.S. committee, had basically locked this super important British report on atomic research in his safe.
Locked it up. Why would he do that?
Apparently, Briggs was worried about security, which I guess makes sense to an extent, but it also shows just how little urgency there was on the American side at that point.
Makes sense. I mean, the British were already in the middle of the war, right?
Exactly. They were feeling the heat way more.
So what happened? Did Oliphant just give up and go home?
Oh, no, he wasn't going to let a locked safe stop him. He went straight to the American scientists, bypassed all the bureaucracy. He really laid it out for them how serious the situation was.
So he was like, hey guys, wake up. This is a big deal.
Pretty much. That visit really helped to get things moving, get everyone on the same page. But then everything changed. December 7th, 1941.
Pearl Harbor. Things were never the same after that.
You got it. The U.S. was officially in World War II, and Roosevelt knew the atomic bomb project had to shift gears big time, from research to full-on production.
So that's where General Leslie Groves comes in. The guy in charge of, what was it called, the Manhattan Project.
That's right. Groves was a military man, through and through. And he had one heck of a job ahead of him.
I bet. Finding locations for all this top secret stuff, getting the materials, keeping it all quiet. It sounds overwhelming.
It was. But they found a place, Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
Oak Ridge. What was special about that spot?
Well, it was isolated, good for secrecy, but also had access to water, power, and transportation. And the terrain, with all the ridges and valleys, it provided some natural protection.
So perfect from a practical standpoint. But what about the people who lived there?
Yeah, that's the tough part. The podcast talks about people like William Gallagher, a farmer who had to leave his land.
No way.
Over 3,000 people were displaced to make room for the project. Imagine being told you had to pack up and leave your home just like that.
That's heartbreaking. So once they had Oak Ridge up and running, what were they actually doing there?
Oak Ridge became the main hub for uranium production. And get this, they were working on 2 different ways to enrich uranium at the same time.
2 different ways.
Yep. Ernest Lawrence, he had this electromagnetic method using giant magnets.
Giant magnets, seriously.
Yeah. And then there was the gaseous diffusion method developed by British scientists.
They were really hedging their bets, huh? Trying everything they could.
Exactly. They needed to succeed.
But they still needed someone to, actually design the bomb.
Right. Groves knew he needed someone brilliant to lead that effort. And that's where J. Robert Oppenheimer comes in.
Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
That's a name that's become synonymous with the atomic bomb.
He was a theoretical physicist, a brilliant mind.
But I remember reading somewhere that there were concerns about him, weren't there?
Yeah, some people questioned his lack of hands-on experience, and there was also his political background.
Right, he had some left-leaning views, didn't he?
He did. But Groves trusted him and appointed him to lead the bomb design team. And for that, they chose Los Alamos, New Mexico.
Los Alamos. Another secret city.
Exactly. And while all this was happening, another critical piece of the puzzle was falling into place in Chicago.
Go on.
December 1942. Enrico Fermi and his team, they achieved something amazing. They created the first controlled, self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction.
So this wasn't like a giant explosion or anything?
No. It was tiny. Just enough energy to power a light bulb, really. But what it meant, that was huge.
I can imagine. They proved it could be done. A nuclear chain reaction could be controlled.
Which was essential for building a bomb.
Right. So let me see if I've got this straight. They're enriching uranium at Oak Ridge. They've got Oppenheimer leading the bomb design team at Los Alamos. And now they've proven that a controlled chain reaction is possible. It feels like all the pieces are in place.
They were. And that's where things get really interesting. Now that they knew an atomic bomb was actually possible, what happens next?
What does happen next?
Yeah.
So much work, so much pressure, and they're still just figuring out if this thing is even possible.
It really was uncharted territory. I mean, try to imagine being one of those scientists at Los Alamos.
Plucked from their normal lives and dropped into this secret world.
Yeah, in the middle of the New Mexico desert. Their mission: design a weapon unlike anything anyone had ever seen.
And the whole time, knowing that the Nazis might be doing the same thing?
The pressure must have been immense.
No doubt. But there were no instruction manuals for building an atomic bomb. So where did they even begin?
They were basically making it up as they went along, inventing the science as they went.
Wow. What was like the biggest challenge?
One of the toughest nuts to crack was how to initiate that super fast chain reaction, the kind you need for an explosion.
Right, that makes sense. But didn't they have 2 possible fuel sources they were looking at?
They did, uranium-235 and plutonium.
And each one, I'm guessing, had its own unique challenges.
Oh, absolutely. It was like designing 2 completely different engines at the same time.
Whoa, that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
What kind of things did they have to consider?
Well, for starters, the shape of the bomb itself. How to arrange the fissile material inside. How to make sure the detonation happened at exactly the right moment.
I bet that was tricky.
Oh, yeah. And on top of all that, they had to make sure the bomb was stable, safe enough to transport and, handle without it going off accidentally.
I can't even imagine. So in the podcast, they mentioned 2 different bomb designs being developed at Los Alamos, a gun type and an implosion type.
Right.
Can you explain the difference?
Sure. The gun type design, that was the simpler one, at least in theory.
How so?
Basically, you fire one piece of uranium-235 into another piece at super high speed.
Okay.
And that creates what's called a critical mass, which triggers the chain reaction.
So like a super fast cannon, but with uranium.
Exactly. The implosion design, that was way more complicated.
That one would work.
They would take a plutonium core and surround it with explosives.
Come on.
Detonate them all at the exact same time to compress the plutonium. That would create the critical mass.
So like squeezing a balloon until it pops.
Kind of, except in this case, the pop is a nuclear explosion.
Yikes. That sounds really hard to pull off.
It was. The trickiest part with the implosion design was getting all those explosives to detonate at the same instant. We're talking incredible precision.
And all of this is happening under a veil of secrecy.
Right.
I mean, those scientists must have been under a lot of stress.
Oh, absolutely. They were living in this bubble, cut off from everyone, families, the outside world, and knowing what they were creating, what it could do.
Yeah, the weight of the world on their shoulders. Did they ever have second thoughts? Did anyone say, hey, maybe we should stop this?
There were definitely debates, a lot of soul searching going on. Some scientists, like Leo Szilard, he was one of the first to push for the U.S. to develop the bomb, but even he started to get worried.
Really?
He actually tried to convince President Roosevelt to just demonstrate the bomb's power as a deterrent instead of actually using it on Japan.
Wow. So even among the scientists who were dedicated to this project, there were real moral struggles.
For sure. This wasn't just about science, it was about the future of humanity. But at that point, the Manhattan Project had so much momentum, it was like a runaway train.
And all this time, they were still worried about Germany.
Right. They had no idea how close the Nazis were to building a bomb.
Did they ever find out?
Well, as the war went on, Allied intelligence started to put the pieces together.
What did they learn?
They found out that the Germans were trying to get their hands on heavy water, a key ingredient for a nuclear reactor.
So it sounded like they were at least looking into it.
Yeah, but there were also signs that they weren't as far along as everyone feared. For example, they found out that one of the top German scientists, Werner Heisenberg, had made a big mistake in his calculations.
One mistake.
One mistake that really slowed down their progress.
Wow, that's incredible. A single miscalculation could have changed everything.
It just goes to show you, even the most brilliant minds can make mistakes.
So the closer the Allies got to Germany, the more they realized the Nazis weren't as close to building a bomb as they'd initially thought. Exactly. But by then, the Manhattan Project was this huge, unstoppable force.
It was. It had taken on a life of its own, fueled by momentum, national pride, the desire to end the war. And by the spring of 1945, they were getting ready to test the bomb.
The Trinity test.
Scheduled for July.
The first detonation of an atomic bomb. That must have been a moment unlike any other.
Years of research, development, incredible effort, all coming down to this one question.
Will it work? I can't even imagine what that moment must have been like, waiting for the results of the Trinity test.
It was July 16th, 1945, 5:29 a.m. The world changed forever.
I get chills just thinking about it. That blinding flash, the mushroom cloud.
The scientists, they were both awestruck and terrified.
I can only imagine they'd actually done it. Created a weapon that could wipe out entire cities.
It's a lot to process.
It is. And the thing is, all this happened after the war in Europe was already over.
Right. Germany surrendered in May of 45.
So what about Japan? What happened next?
Well, the war in the Pacific was still going strong. And Japan, they were showing no signs of giving up.
So the U.S. was in a tough spot.
They were. They'd already been bombing Japanese cities, but there were heavy casualties on both sides.
So some people thought that using the atomic bomb might be the only way to end the war quickly?
There was that belief, yes, that it would actually save lives in the long run.
Because it would prevent a full-scale invasion of Japan.
Exactly. But of course, there were strong arguments against using it, too.
I can see why. I mean, a weapon that powerful, it must have been an impossible decision.
It was. And people still debate it today. Was it a necessary evil? Or a horrific act that opened the door to a whole new kind of warfare?
It's a question with no easy answers. So the Manhattan Project, this race against Germany, it ended with the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
In August of 1945.
And Japan surrendered shortly after. It's hard to grasp the scale of it all. What do you think is the lasting legacy of the Manhattan Project?
It's a powerful reminder, I think, of what humans are capable of, the good and the bad.
The ingenuity, the ambition, but also the potential for destruction.
Exactly. And it shows us that science is never just about science. It's always tied up with politics, with morality, with the big questions about what it means to be human.
What's the role of science in society? What responsibilities do scientists have? How do we control these incredibly powerful weapons?
Questions we're still wrestling with today. The Manhattan Project, it brought us into the atomic age.
An age of incredible potential, but also incredible danger.
Right. And it's a legacy we all share.
It really is.
Yeah.
This deep dive, it's been, eye-opening, sobering. It makes you think about the choices we make, both as individuals and as a species.
It does.
The scientists who worked on the Manhattan Project, they had to focus on the task at hand, the science, the engineering. But I think for the rest of us, we can't afford to just ignore the bigger picture.
I agree.
We have to engage with these tough questions. We have to understand the full impact of what we create. Because the choices we make today, they'll shape the world for generations to come.